it is 10:15 and we have 28 participants and more growing. So why don't we go ahead? We are just so pleased today to have Clemson University's Center for Corporate Learning, all of you wonderful gang here today. And I am just going to turn the mic over to Nan.
Nan. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this presentation on succession management. Our presenters today are Mary Alice Bowers, Gail DePriest, and Caroline Fritz. Meanwhile, the two women behind the curtain are Sally Willette and Jessica Moss. We will lay out our shared roles and objectives as well as a case study. After that, we'll take questions. So if you have any, go ahead and enter them in the chat box. We'll be monitoring and teeing those up. Enjoy the show. Slide.
Well, I wanted to share with you quickly what the initial driver was for TNS Brass to consider the need for a succession plan, and what I soon learned after trying to learn more about how to approach that project was that we didn't just need a succession plan, we needed a knowledge management system for our company. And we've had quite the journey with this group of professionals who came in to help me. Certainly, we've all learned a lot, and I hope today we'll be able to kind of show you that this project that I thought was just really going to be very narrow, and it was going to be a deliverable that I needed for specific purposes, really came to have a life of its own, so to speak, and we ended up getting so much more benefit from the process. So just to set the stage, TNS Brass had just experienced just enormous growth over the course of probably a season of about 5 years. We had seen growth in every way. We were growing globally, adding new customers all over the world. We were also just simply, I was adding employees and salespeople everywhere. And we found ourselves in need of an ERP system that could handle multiple currencies. And we needed to basically we had to teach our people how to evolve from a smaller business to a global scope and manage the growth in a way that made sense so that we could have better decision making. We had very low turnover, an aging workforce. These people had contributed to the success of the company, and now we needed to give them the skills that they needed to help us evolve to an even larger organization. And none of us had really done that before. I'm a perfect example, having grown up at TNS, so to speak. Many of us had been there 20 plus years, and the nature of our job was simply, let's just learn how to do that. Okay, nobody's done that before, but somebody's got to figure this out. Our customer needs it. So we would throw somebody at it. Well, John can do that. He's got time, or whatever. And so over the course of time, we ended up having a lot of people who had very unique roles, not necessarily a role that was, the title didn't necessarily indicate what their function was. So in some cases, we even had people that didn't even realize how incredibly valuable they were, because it was just, oh, well, I've just done that for years. I've been doing that. That's just not part of my job. So that was another element of it. We also began to have the need, as we acquired companies, we were needing to deploy our seasoned leaders in order to assimilate companies that we were purchasing. We needed to be able to send people for maybe 6 or 8 weeks to China or to Italy to help them develop their groups. And I needed to make sure that we could keep the ship here, the main headquarters of the company, and all of our manufacturing. We had to keep this ship running smoothly as we add on these other companies. So, and then to kind of top it all off, I called it the perfect storm for me, because I had all of these different kind of moving pieces spurring me on to try to find, okay, we're going to have to kind of handle this well. And I wanted to be a resource to our leaders who are becoming more and more stressed. ISO 9000, the most recent standard that we were required to be certified to, began requiring an emphasis on risk management. So we looked at truly some overall risk we had as an organization, and it did our aging workforce as well as some very key positions we just simply didn't have backup for. So we needed to look at it from that standpoint as well. Sally, you can advance to the next slide. Okay, it took us a long time to pull the trigger on this project, and it was because I had several concerns. I'm a very human resource manager, and I had some real pain points around how our people were going to engage with this, and I knew that the success of our project would depend upon how well our leaders and our subject matter experts, how they embraced the process. I didn't want them to be reluctant to share information. And some of our associates kind of have it, and you probably know in your organizations, you've got some folks who love being the only one who knows certain things, because that makes them feel really, gives them the strokes they need or whatever, and they enjoy being the go-to for certain processes. And so I wanted those things handled really, really delicately. I was already worried that all the managers that were going to be tasked with taking part in this were stressed with the new ERP conversion for that system, as well as all the acquisitions. We already had very full plates. So I wanted this to be something that they could see as manageable. And then we wanted to find a way, when we were looking at succession planning, true succession planning, where I had someone that had announced their retirement, I didn't want them to at all feel pressured that we were trying to rush their exit or make them feel at all that we were anxious for them to go, but rather that we really, really valued them. And I wanted that handled very, very well, and I wanted to honor them. And then I also wanted to make sure that the people that we were needing to get information from, they didn't feel at all as if the only reason we want you to share this with us is because we had some agenda to maybe replace them or to take their job away. So there were a lot of human factors that I spent a great deal of time up front with the team at Clemson, trying to make sure they understood when they engaged with our people that these were some of my concerns. And so that's kind of how we started. And I'm anxious for Caroline and Gail to share with you some of the ways that they helped us solve these problems. And then I'm going to come back at the end and share with you some of the unexpected lessons and the benefits that we had that we didn't even anticipate when we first started. Thank you.
So for the HR leader, it's critical to get all players on board and aligned to the process. They must begin to be ready. The Clemson team facilitated a half-day workshop for TNS Brass and Bronze Works, in which key leaders and essential knowledge workers discover the interconnectedness of shared knowledge, as well as determine where there is a sole owner knowledge. This is also the time to establish a unified language and governance. Your team must begin to think about reasonable timelines and how schedules impact these interactions. During this session, no concrete deliverables can be identified, because that will be determined by the as yet unknown knowledge in the room. Rather, the Clemson approach allows them to take the first step toward discovering what deliverables are essential. Slide, please.
So we were very pleased to work with TNS Brass, and especially as you hear Mary Alice speak about the approach that she felt was important for her organization. We heard that loud and clear. She really wanted to empower her leaders and support them in a way that would be comfortable for them and their unique culture, which was almost familial. The kind of support that we saw, the kind of people growing up there and so forth, the retention was incredible. So we wanted to honor that. And one of the ways we started with the senior team was to bring in the Herman brain dominance. So what we were looking at here, and the gentle reminder to everyone, is that everyone has different thinking preferences. So as you begin to manage a change project like this, you are going to have individuals that really are going to be very focused and need all the facts. the numbers as much as possible. But people in that lower quadrant, the green quadrant, sometimes they are all about needing a plan, which isn't always going to be ready at the beginning. So being able to talk through some of that. The people that fall into kind of that red quadrant, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Thank you, Sally. The red quadrant, those individuals are going to need more conversation around what's happening, and that if they can get more of that, then they can feel more comfortable with that. And the upper quadrant are the individuals that like change and like experimental, but sometimes they can feel a little concerned about change because they begin to worry about the freedom to create new things. And so we use this model with the organization, starting with the senior team, to get everyone kind of getting a sense of where maybe they tended to have their preferences. Were they more left hemisphere, left brain oriented, or were they more a preference for more right brained, or what were their dominant cognitive preferences? So we started with this, and we started getting people kind of comfortable realizing that they could use this for their own filter to determine what their needs are going to be, and maybe areas that might be less comfortable, but also to use this as they begin to talk with their employees about some of the coming change. Slide, please. On this slide, you can see that with our preferences, the quadrants A and B on the left hemisphere of the brain is more about gathering facts and information. So those individuals in your organization will have a lot of questions about that. And so you want to be sure you're able to speak to that, or at least talk about that in terms of what's coming and what facts we know. The quadrant below that are those individuals that want the timeline for the plan, and actually will be very good and have assets for helping you create that. The red quadrant, the lower right quadrant, are again those individuals that really, may have a little bit more of an emotional reaction to it. They want to have the conversations about it. They want to feel good about it. And so, again, the upper right quadrant, we use this tool actually also with the sales group at TNS. And what we can see here is the strengths, the upper quadrant, those individuals, they have the big ideas, they're the ideators, and they are in marketing sometimes. They want those freedoms, and they're going to have great ideas for going forward. So we wanted to get a look at the strengths, but we want to move on now to the next slide, where you can see here's where some of the frustrations might come in for employees at TNS. And Mary Alice was very sensitive to this. She wanted to make sure those individuals in that relational quadrant, the lower right, had the conversations, felt supported, felt that extra, attention and support that they needed. But she also wanted to be able to speak to the individuals who were waiting on a plan and a timeline. And we didn't always have that. We were still working on that. So this kind of maps out how the different filters for how right brain or left brain, how individuals were processing. Let's go to the next slide. And this just gives you a picture of using this Herman brain dominance as a thinking tool. So we talked about a whole brain process when we're in the room together. We talked about the fact that, getting the facts together so that we can start working on kind of laying out the timeline, but what kind of training needs to occur? And then also what's the vision for the future? And as people could kind of weigh in and see where they tend to sit at this table in terms of their thinking preferences, it helped them better understand how they might contribute more boldly, but areas that might make them a little, maybe not as comfortable. Next slide, please. One of the things that we did as an appreciative inquiry exercise, and we actually asked that senior team, where would you like to see TNS in 5 years? And in this appreciative inquiry model, which is actually used by NASA and other, even sometimes whole towns will use, whole cities will use appreciative inquiry, we ask the question, where do you see yourself? And we had people write, in teams, write articles, Wall Street Journal article, what did they say about TNS Brass in 5 years? So the team had some fun with that, but it also gave them license to really think about, what can it look like in the future? What would we like it to look like in the future? And really start, really giving people license and an experimental space to really think about that. Next slide, please. So that's everything I have, except we did also add in a coaching feature, and we did help people start beginning coaching culture conversations, asking individuals about the space they were in, and we built that into the program as well. Caroline?
Thank you, Gail. Good morning, everybody. I'm Caroline Fritz, and I'd like to start with a quick level set. Knowledge management is getting the right information to the right person at the right time. You've probably heard of just-in-time manufacturing. Well, most of us aren't factory workers, and our processes aren't visible. We're knowledge workers, and not all of us are the best at documenting the processes we use and the information that we slowly over time accumulate in our brains. And the thought of that can actually be pretty overwhelming. So where do we start? Well, I thought it would be helpful to look at a couple of the guiding principles of knowledge management. First, there are different types of knowledge. Knowledge is a combination of both explicit and implicit knowledge. Explicit knowledge includes codified data, such as that found in documents, and implicit knowledge refers to experienced-based knowledge. It's the stuff that we hold up here. So one approach of knowledge management is to look at existing documentation and identify what additional data and information might be required to optimize the use of that documentation. So that can be pretty overwhelming, which brings us to the second guiding principle, which is not all knowledge is created equal. Somehow we need to figure out what knowledge is critical to our business strategy, what knowledge is critical to our customers, and what knowledge is critical to our organizational goals. Next slide, please. So before we do, let's ask an honest question. Why? How important is this really? We've been getting along just fine without implementing knowledge management. So let's consider this. According to a McKinsey report, employees spend 1.8 hours every single day, which is 9.3 hours per week, on average, searching and gathering information. So put another way, businesses hire 5 employees, but only 4 show up for work. The 5th is off searching for answers, but not contributing any value. Secondly, IDC data shows that the knowledge worker spends about 2.5 hours every single day, or roughly 30% of their workday, searching for information. 60% of company executives felt that time constraints and lack of understanding of how to find information were preventing their employees from finding the information they needed. I'm sure you all can relate to this, but it's pretty shocking, isn't it? As an industrial engineer or a process improvement engineer, I can tell you we spend a lot of time improving our factory processes, think automation, but we don't often consider how we can make our back office processes more efficient. Yet some estimate our back office accounts for 80% of our business expenses. So if this doesn't convince you that knowledge management is important, perhaps this will. And Mary Alice alluded to this. In 2015, the International Organization for Standardization added managing organizational knowledge to the Quality Management System Standard, or ISO 9001. Specifically, the ISO requirement for organizational knowledge asks that organizations determine what knowledge is needed to operate the business, maintain that knowledge and make it available as needed, And consider how your organization will update its knowledge base to support the changing needs in your business. So whether it makes good business sense or you're required to implement some form of knowledge management as part of your risk management strategy to support your ISO 9001 certification, let's now take a look at how we helped TNS Brass identify and capture critical knowledge. Next slide, please. Having worked with the TNS leadership team on their succession planning strategy, we gained some insight into both the company culture as well as their business strategy. And based on this analysis, we learned a few things. First, as Mary Alice said, and like most of you all, this is a company that has a lot on its plate. They're growing, they're in a highly competitive market, they're implementing new systems, and they're a lean organization. We knew that depending on how many possible areas of critical knowledge we found, we might not have the time to capture all of it. We have to prioritize. So taking into account 8 different criteria, we developed a simple prioritization tool that would allow us to measure the criticality of each potential knowledge capture project. Next slide. We decided to take a bilateral approach. We started with a top-down view, working with each of the leadership team individually to identify 2 things for each of their functional areas. First, where is the critical knowledge? And second, where is it at risk? A quick side note, wherever you have one person that holds some bit of critical knowledge, regardless of how close to retirement that person is, that knowledge is at risk. So we used an interview process and we asked each of the leadership team these questions. What are the top priorities in your functional area? What does your team have to do well in order to meet your organizational goals? What processes or tasks are involved in meeting those goals? What people or roles are involved? And finally, what would happen if the people that hold this knowledge just didn't show up for work? And then we got in a little deeper and met with the managers in these areas and asked those same questions. And from here, we had a list of 10 or so employees that were perceived to hold at-risk critical knowledge. In the knowledge business, we call these folks subject matter experts or SMEs, and I'm sure you have heard that before. So now in the case of TNS, we were pleasantly surprised to find that in many parts of the business, employees had actually been cross-trained and had a backup resource for their position. I've worked with some clients where we've identified at least 80 potential knowledge capture projects, and we have to go through a prioritization exercise to whittle that list down into something more manageable. So although we developed a prioritization tool, we were happy to not have to choose, in this case, between projects. So next we employed the bottom-up approach. So for each of those 10 SMEs that had been identified that held at-risk critical knowledge, we identified the people, processes, and systems that they supported. We developed a survey tool and asked all of the people that interacted with that particular SME, from fellow employees to customers, the following questions. What type of direction, information, or decision support do you regularly seek from this SME? If you didn't get the question answered by this SME, could you still complete the process or get the job done? And what does that SME do in his or her role that no other team member can? So this tool helped us to further refine our list of SMEs, and it also gave us the specific focus areas within each of the SMEs' base of knowledge that needed to be documented. So each focus area now represents a manageable and discrete knowledge capture project. Next slide. But before we moved forward with the interview process to capture the knowledge, we identified an additional tool that allows us to dovetail once again with the succession planning effort. Rather than have a group of consultants capturing and documenting information, what if we pulled in a potential successor to that SME that could participate in the interview process and help document some of this at-risk critical knowledge. This would allow TNS to both capture and transfer the knowledge at the same time, and could be an excellent development opportunity for other high potential employees. So we call these folks knowledge stewards. We also used a cross-functional team approach in our knowledge capture work sessions, bringing in folks from other functional areas, upstream and downstream of the work process of each SME, thus allowing for further alignment to TNS business strategies, including their system implementation, where identifying requirements and documenting end-to-end processes was also needed. This cross-functional approach allowed for a final unexpected win. So we often work in silos. I'm sure you're very familiar with that. It's not always a bad thing. It helps us stay focused. It allows us to optimize our individual work. But when we do this, we don't see the end-to-end process. When we step back and see the end-to-end process and how our work affects those downstream from us and how we are affected by those upstream from us, we're able to optimize that whole process. At TNS, this allowed us to identify some really valuable process improvement opportunities that not only benefit their internal team, but their suppliers, partners, and customers as well. So on a final note, I just want to add this one thing. Would you rather the keepers of your critical knowledge, your SMEs, be tied up wrestling with systems, answering questions, and supporting other employees? Or would you rather them spend their time helping develop your long-term strategy and focusing on delighting your customers? Gail, back to you.
Thank you, Caroline. One additional component of this project is that we involved a Clemson MBA executive class, which actually writes case studies on regional businesses. So TNS through the years has won many awards. They're a unique culture, and our students in this class were very interested in studying their culture. Next slide, please. Our students did many interviews internally, and they started to capture some of the points about this culture of success, like the fact that 85% of orders are shipped the same day. That's just standard at TNS. They also offer to the market an efficiency rate of about 95%, meaning they reach back, they touch back at a very high rate in terms of staying connected to customers. There's a very high level of trust that's built into the interactions that Mary Alice alluded to earlier. A lot of respect and making sure that, you know, if one of us succeeds, we know that all of us will succeed. So that this culture had grown over a period of time, and our students were fascinated with that. Next slide. We interviewed, one of the interviews was with Ken Gallagher, the Vice President of Global Sales, and he articulated, in his opinion, that the mantras, the way that individuals approach each other at TNS on the whole, is about being respectful of coworkers, exercising true leadership, leading with integrity, striving for excellence. TNS invests in its employees. They have created an environment of respect and collaboration. There's an encouragement for vision and for innovating. And the company is known to take risk, intelligent risk, calculated risk, as employees have ideas. And so that's the background that our students found in their interview with Ken. And in the next slide, please. The case study recommendation that they made was to define and document the values that are apparent in this organization, and to make sure that in the future there's a hiring for these values. So codifying values and also rewarding the values. Personification of values, and there's just an article referenced here about about Starbucks, which is very much a culture of employee first, and so that was shared with TNS Brass. But these are the recommendations made by our case studies. And go to the next slide, please. So I'll move this back to Mary Alice, but our students absolutely enjoyed working with the culture and wanted to really underscore that the culture is a big part of the success of TNS.
So I realize now at the very beginning, I didn't even introduce myself. So I'm Mary Alice Bowers, and I've been with TNS for, it'll be 30 years next year. And my position here has morphed, certainly, because I've done a little bit of everything, starting in the customer service area. And so I've literally grown up with the people here. We found this whole process, of course, I was so intimidated when this obviously fell in my plate, that I needed to be the one responsible for getting this done for our organization, but I had no idea how to approach it. So I remember the first time I sat down with Nan and described, okay, here's what I need to do. Here are all of the kind of, it's multifaceted. Here's some of my problems. What can we do? And they really did work with me over a period of several months before we even involved another person at TNS, because we wanted to make sure that, I wanted to make sure it was embraced from the get-go. So I spent a lot of energy making sure that I felt like we were going to present it in a way that each person would be able to see how buy-in was going to help their own unique management problems. And so then we began this series of meetings with the leadership training that Gail described. So I found at the end of this, there were so many different things that, first of all,
to unlock your iPad first.
This is my iPad because Siri thinks I've asked it something. Sorry. We learned so much, just new language. I think there was a great morale contribution. It was beneficial to the morale of the group, because a lot of people, I do think, underestimated how critical their processes were, how important they were to the growth of the company. And so we were able to honor that and kind of highlight, look at where we've come. Do you remember when you used to do it this way and now we're doing it this way? And so I think having the occasion to have a project where we were all working together and where we had permission to discuss kind of the historic story, the story of our evolution, it was really, really rewarding for a lot of folks. We did learn, it was an overwhelming project to me when I looked at our whole group of 320 people here in Travelers Rest. How am I going to make sure that we capture this knowledge appropriately and we plan for succession properly? Having an outside resource to come in and help us define where the real risk was and get it into a manageable list of projects was just really invaluable to me. We were pleasantly surprised that because our production area is so, is procedure driven, we're ISO 9000 certified, and we do an awful lot of cross training. Caroline mentioned earlier, we had very little risk in our production area because we do have a collaborative workforce. This is something I learned overall. If your workforce is collaborative, there's less risk. Seems kind of basic, but it did bring us a lot more confidence that we're okay. If we lost somebody for whatever reason, in these areas, we're really going to be okay because there's a lot of people with hands and eyes on that, and they know what they're doing. Also, having the outside resource helped us when maybe it was a topic that was particularly sensitive, and I knew that it was going to rub somebody the wrong way when somebody tried to intrude into that area of responsibility. Having this engineer, Caroline, who was there for the sole purpose of saying, okay, I'm going to find out what is the valuable knowledge that you keep. It was less threatening. And it helped us go there, so to speak, some issues that have been maybe bottlenecks or some problem areas where we've had with collaboration between groups. Having the outside person be the leader on that helped us to get beyond that. And so I found that to be very, very helpful. The process improvements between the departments was a natural evolution of the process. We found that, and this is just a for instance, maybe we had a Monday morning report that was being generated in 3 different departments. John was generating this report for use in sales. Carol was putting out this report for outside salespeople, and another person in accounting was generating this report for internal users. And so we found out, hey, basically 3 people are creating the same report. Why don't you all have one report and you share this information? It helps us with all kinds of things. So process improvements were a natural outgrowth of this. And then finally, I'll say that our Ken Gallagher, our Vice President of Global Sales, he took this kind of to the next level. When we finished doing this work and we realized how much our people embraced it and how much good we gained, he started using this when we would go pitch to new customers. He used this to share with them, look, T&S Brass, we're not going to leave you in a lurch. We've got it going on as far as how we're making sure that we have lots of people trained to do the things that are important to you. The salesperson that you have grown to know and love and trust, even though she's retiring, we've spent the last 6 months really gaining from her what she's doing and how important it is, and we're not going to miss a beat. We're going to introduce you to your new person. So we were able to use the information that Caroline helped us organize for preparing specific onboarding processes for new salespeople. We developed training materials for our customer service area, just using the knowledge management materials that were created. We were able to use those internally for several different ways. And then at the end of all of this, I also was able to successfully get my succession plan done. And I feel like at the end of it, we really had a very complete picture of where we were, where we had gaps, where I needed to focus on maybe hiring someone to fill certain gaps. And as I'll close by saying this, Gail's material at the very beginning where we looked at that, and I can't remember the official, the Herman brain dominance. That helped me look at diversity and hiring for diversity in a really new light. We recognized very early on, we all did the test, and they placed our results down on top of each other so we could see where our organization had strengths and weaknesses, where we had most people. And it was very clear that we've got a lot of engineering, a lot of production minds, a lot of very serious and capable structure people. And we were a little bit light on creativity and change, people who were not averse to change. And so bringing that to light in a context of discussion helped us see that, even though it might be more comfortable to hire more people that are just like you, really what our company needs to have our full decision making is to hire some people with some different skill sets. And so that gave me new initiatives and new ways of looking at how we can better the company and our hiring processes as well. And so I think now, Nan, are you going to help guide us through the question and answer time?
We have a few questions ready to go. Sally, why don't you kick off the first question? We'll give it to Mary Alice. How long did the entire project take?
From when I first began engaging with the actual employees, I would say we took 6 or 8 months deciding how to approach the project, and me learning a lot. But once we kicked it off with our leadership team with those first meetings, from that time forward, it took about a year and maybe 2 or 3 months. So when we really got into the meat of it with Caroline.
And Mary, I have a follow-up. Is how much did this take away from production, or did it?
Oh, it didn't. It couldn't take away from production.
Okay.
Not at all.
And I'd like to add, Mary Alice wanted no surprises in terms of the billing cycle. And we worked out a monthly fee, and that was the way we handled the whole project throughout the length of it. So do we need some more questions? I've got some here. So, you know, in determining your organization's readiness for succession planning and knowledge management, Mary Alice, can you give us a little more detail about working through that documentation and how we were able to assist you with that?
Well, I don't think we were ready. We had to have Caroline's help to understand even how to get ready. So she made it very approachable. When you use words that are unfamiliar to our people, one of the things that I feared about this very basically was we had never done this before, and what would be read into that. You know, why are they doing this? Are they getting ready to? Are we getting ready to sell the company? What's her motivation for wanting this all of a sudden? So I had to really start with, look, we've got to explain why we want to get this done, and kind of prove out a case for why this is going to be good for you, why this is going to help you. One of the things that was really nice is having that gap analysis. Okay, you're good. You're doing good here. You're doing good here. It looks like all of this is covered, but this is a very obvious place where you don't have any backup. This person right here, if they miss work, you have to wait. That job waits until the next time they're here. But what if they don't ever come back? You know, what if for whatever reason? We didn't have a lot of this documentation in place at all until we started approaching this project. So we had procedures in place in the manufacturing area, but a lot of our more creative areas, marketing, sales, where those are really close to the customer. They're very responsive, very nimble. They're constantly pivoting to do whatever the next day calls for. Those processes are not documented. So there's where we found that we needed to spend our energy. I hope that answered the question. I'm not sure it did.
It did. And Caroline, I was going to ask you about the documentation process itself, how you manage it, how TNS assisted with that, and how you determined what the best documentation was to use.
So I am not a fan of creating documentation for the sake of putting it in a binder and putting it somewhere and just having it just in case. I like to make, as I mentioned when we first started, or if I shared about knowledge management, we want to make sure it's the right information at the right time to the right people. So the inquiry was regarding what documentation or what tools to use to share the documentation. Was a matter of what tools does TNS already use? What systems and tools and processes do they already have in place for sharing information? And I want to add something. TNS has an incredible culture in place around knowledge sharing. If you go to the TNS website, you can easily find drawings for all the different parts and products that they sell. They're very open in a knowledge sharing, has a knowledge sharing sort of culture. And regarding the actual getting that knowledge out of people's heads and turning it into something, and this kind of speaks to how long the process took. One of the reasons that our process took a year to a year and a half was just, these people are busy. TNS has a lot of other projects, a lot of other priorities. So a lot of that was just around scheduling and getting people's time. But for each knowledge capture project, there were probably 2 to 4 workshops or meetings that I facilitated. And those might have been 90 minutes to 2 hours. And so if you imagine for each of your subject matter experts, it was about 12 hours total of their time. And we collaborated to create the documentation. I do that on my time. We would bat, documentation back and forth. And again, we had knowledge stewards to help with that. So all in all, I would say from the subject matter expert and knowledge steward time standpoint, it was probably around 20 hours total per project. So it's not a humongous investment of individual employees' time.
One last insight I'd like to make. I remember when Mary Alice might remember this, but Gail and I certainly remember when we got Gail's survey information back. One of the participants from Mary Alice's executive leadership team had crossed the instructions, and so instead of giving Gail all best possible answers, he gave her all worst possible answers. And it was a huge insight. We realized, of course, that what had taken place. But Gail, you've always tried to be available when needed as a resource throughout this whole process. And just talk a little bit about that, how it impacted you and you learned, and how you hope it impacted TNS.
I had read about TNS. I'd seen awards that they won, and I would be like, wow, they won the Silver Crescent Award or whatever. What are they doing up there? And so getting to go in and meet their, senior team. And as Mary Alice said, it was so interesting to see them all come together and really have that moment of reflection on all that they had accomplished. And really to see people around the room affirm. We always ask the question, what's your most proud moment? And the stories they told, would just make you cry. The big success with the customer, the time they all worked together to pull something through, they had stories that were just phenomenal. And it was so just to get to be a part of that and witness that, it was an amazing thing. It really was. That reflection point I will never forget. And then to see their dreams for going forward. And again, the collaboration in the room it's just not what you see every day. And so I think that for me to be any part of that and any part of helping people kind of look at their own information and go, wow, this is me. I do have these preferences, and this other area doesn't interest me as much, but now I know that, so and get to share that information with each other. And so it was an amazing experience. I was grateful to be part of it.
As all of us were, and Mary Alice was a terrific partner. Are there any other questions out there, Sally?
Yes, I think when you look at the knowledge management process, how does it differ, let's say, for a nonprofit or a small company as compared? I don't know who wants to take that.
I can give that a shot. Based on my experience working with both not-for-profit and for-profit, to be honest, there's really not too much of a difference. Organizations have, areas where knowledge is critical, and most organizations these days are very lean. And so oftentimes you will find that you have one person that does accounts payable, or one person that handles pricing increases or programs, or deals with a specific customer or a client. So there's really not a whole lot of difference in the way that knowledge is managed in nonprofit versus for-profit organizations.
Anything else, anyone?
Yeah, also kind of going on that, Caroline, what is the difference between knowledge management and production management?
So knowledge management is really specific to information that's needed for people to do their jobs. It could be in the production area. It could be around a specific piece of machinery, troubleshooting when there's a problem with a specific piece of machinery. Or, you know, on the office side, it could be troubleshooting a system or how we handled a problem on a particular project in the past. So it's all about information, and it's largely information that's up here in our heads that we want to make sure that we're sharing more effectively. Production management is really related to managing how your business produces whatever product it is you produce. And it's much more reliant on your managing your resources, your machinery, your processes, your equipment, your personnel.
Oh, okay, thank you. And so I can assume that everybody had complete buy-in at the start, right?
Mary Alice?
Oh, I'm not going to paint a picture that it was this perfect storybook from the beginning. We always have, I think, personalities that are suspicious or just reluctant to share just by nature of their personality. So we have some of that here. But all in all, I think as one thing that happened is that really helped, I can remember this specifically. I worried that some of our folks who were really truly approaching retirement, it was kind of known that maybe they hadn't announced the date they were going to leave, but it was kind of obvious that they were like working toward retirement. We wanted to make sure that we captured their knowledge, make sure we were prepared for that. But then we came to realize we had several of those. But then we had this one young man who had started to work for us and had been with us about 5 years. His job had evolved because the company had exploded since he had come. He had a lot of, he's one of our super users for Excel. He understood data, understood how to manipulate data, and could get questions answered quickly for lots of different people. So John had become a very critical part of our work very fast. And we, maybe all the different managers didn't realize that other people were dependent upon him too. But through the course of this process, it was like, hey, we got some risk right here. If we lost John, so he's like, I don't know, 30 years old. He might not have even been 30 at the time. So when I had some questions about, well, why are you already talking to me about this? I don't know if I'm going to retire. It's probably going to be at least 5 more years. I could say, well, listen, we're not doing this because you're retiring. We're doing this because you could do anything. You may just leave us tomorrow. What if you get recruited? Or John's doing this. We see that there's a similar risk with John. And so we were able to really believably say, it doesn't necessarily have to do just with your approaching retirement. This is organizational risk. You are the only person that knows how to do this. You've been the only person here doing this job for the last 25 years. We got to have somebody see what you're doing and understand how you're doing it. So that helped us with it. But, and then on some of the ones that it was painful for some to have to pull their drawer out and explain their system for how they decided certain things. We even had one lady that her programs were called the drawer programs. Absolutely nothing was out there saved. It was clearly a manual process. And so then there's where we were able to encourage toward process improvement and how can you maybe get this done more easily. And Caroline was great at that, kind of helping us learn how to share information much more efficiently. So I think by the end of it, they were less threatened. And then the way that the interview process went, I think once they got into the room, started answering the questions and started understanding how the process was going to work, then the trust came.
Mm-hmm.
And I can add on to that.
Mm-hmm.
Just from my perspective, a big piece of knowledge management and knowledge capture and transfer is organizational change management. And by and large, most people, we all have this human need to be seen and to be heard, to be validated. And once even, starting with the leadership team and working down to the SMEs and even the people that work with the SMEs and helping identify those focus areas, people felt valued, they felt heard. And so there was that added benefit of feeling like they matter. And so Mary Alice alluded to that with the SMEs, but it really goes across the board that people need to feel heard. And then in some of these workshops where we had a cross-functional team assembled, but it was really to capture knowledge from one particular SME, and we ended up with these process improvement opportunities. I've never worked with a cross-functional team to map out a process where light bulbs didn't go on and people didn't say, oh my gosh, that's the way you process this information? Well, I could provide it in this other format and it'll be much easier for you to upload to that system. And so people generally, when given the opportunity, like to improve how their work process works for them. And so this gave people an opportunity to make changes to their process and improve the way they do things and make their work life easier. So I think once we got into it, it becomes a fun, energized process. And I think at the end of the day, pretty much everyone that I met with or talked with was happy to have that opportunity to share what they know and what they do.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think that brings kind of everything full circle in that you get the buy-in from, leadership, and then allowing people really to come into a company, but in the process of meeting people where they are and not necessarily trying to pull them along, but meeting them where they are and letting them know that this is a process that is only going to make everything better, but you really have to do it in that caring way. So thank you so much for that.
I think we're almost at the end of our time. So if anyone else has any questions, please enter the chat room and let us know. Sally will let us know. So we're seeing that there don't appear to be questions out there. I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and I'd love to give kudos to my excellent panelists, my wonderful back office people, Sally and Jessica, in this case only. They're not normally back office. It's been an honor to be here with G-SHRM today, and we look forward to other ways to interact with all of you. Thank you for joining us today. Go Tigers.